Think about this for a second. A house looks totally normal, right? Like any other house on the street. Then you see the dad on TV. He's got tears in his eyes. He's pleading, begging for his pregnant wife and his two little girls to just come home safe. But what if all that worry, that desperation, what if it's just an act, a mask hiding something truly, deeply evil underneath?
It's a really disturbing thought, isn't it? And it's the core of the Watts family story. We're talking about Christopher Watts, his wife Shanann, who was pregnant, and their two daughters, Bella, just 4, and Celeste, only 3. They lived in Frederick, Colorado.
Yeah, and from the outside, looking at social media, everything, they seem like a happy, average family.
Absolutely. But that whole picture just it can completely shatter in August 2018 in a way that, frankly, is still hard to comprehend.
So Shanann had been away, right? A business trip. She gets back home really early, like the wee hours of August 13th.
That's right. And then later that same day, her friend, Nichol Kessinger, she starts getting really worried.
Because Shanann missed a doctor's appointment. Which is a big deal, obviously, being pregnant.
A huge deal. And she wasn't answering her phone, wasn't responding to texts. Nichol just had this awful gut feeling that something was seriously wrong. And, well, she was right. Her call basically kicked off the whole investigation.
And Chris Watts. Initially, his reaction seemed, well, like what you might expect.
At first, yeah. He played the part of the distraught husband. He even did interviews with local news channels.
Say what? That he was confused, didn't know where they were?
Pretty much. Said he wanted them back desperately. He even threw out this idea that maybe Shanann had taken the girls to a friend's house.
Yeah.
It's vague,
It's like planting a seed, maybe?
Maybe. But it was all, as we now know, just a performance. A terrible lie he was constructing before the horrific truth eventually surfaced.
So today, we're going to really dig into the events of this case. We'll look at the reports, the available information, and try to piece together how everything unfolded, how it all went so catastrophically wrong.
Yeah, just trying to understand the timeline and the facts as we know them.
Okay, so Shanann's reported missing. Nichol raises the alarm. The police go to the Watts house for a welfare check. What did they find inside?
Well, the scene inside was odd. That's probably the best word for it. The family dog was there, unharmed, seemed okay.
Okay, so the dog's fine.
Right, but then you have Shanann's purse just sitting there. Her keys were in it, her medication, things you'd absolutely take if you were leaving, even just for a friend's house.
Doesn't sound like someone planning to be gone long, or planning to leave at all, really.
Exactly. And her car was still in the garage. Crucially, the children's car seats were still inside it.
Oh, wow. You don't take toddlers anywhere without car seats.
No, you don't. And maybe the most unsettling detail, Shanann's wedding ring. It was found just sitting on the bedside table.
Left behind. That's chilling.
Yeah.
It's like these little pieces of their normal life are just scattered around, but the people are missing.
Precisely. And then there was her phone.
Where was that?
It wasn't immediately obvious, but later, investigators found Shanann's cell phone. It had been pushed down, kind of hidden, between the cushions of the living room couch.
Okay, that makes the gone to a friend's house story even less believable, right? You'd take your phone.
Absolutely. It just added to the feeling that this wasn't a voluntary departure. It pointed towards something sudden, something violent, perhaps, that wasn't her choice.
And Chris is still sticking to his story at this point.
Yeah.
That Shanann mentioned going somewhere with the girls.
Yeah, he kept repeating that line, that she'd talked about taking the girls to a friend's. But it felt flimsy even then. And then came the neighbor's security camera.
Ah, yes. The footage. That really changed things, didn't it?
Massively. It's amazing sometimes how one small piece of evidence, like that camera footage, can just blow a case wide open.
What did it actually show?
It captured Chris Watts early that morning. First, it showed him loading a red gas can into his work truck.
A gas can? Why would he need that so early?
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Right, raises immediate questions. But even more significantly, the camera recorded him backing his truck right up into the garage shortly after the time Shanann would have arrived home.
Backing in, so like blocking the view from the street?
Exactly, making it impossible for anyone passing by to see what he might be loading into the truck bed from inside the garage.
And this directly contradicted what he'd been telling police about his morning.
Completely. His whole timeline, his story about when he last saw them, what he was doing, that video footage just didn't line up with it at all.
That must have been a huge moment for the investigators, the point where suspicion really hardens.
Absolutely. It was really the first piece of concrete evidence suggesting Chris wasn't just a worried husband, but potentially involved. It shifted the whole focus.
And that's when the bigger agencies got involved.
Yes, that's when the local police realized this was likely something much more serious than a missing persons case. They called in the FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, the CBI.
Bringing in more resources, more expertise.
Exactly. Forensic teams, behavioral analysts, experienced homicide investigators, the whole weight of federal and state resources.
So with the FBI and CBI involved, and the neighbor's footage contradicting his story, the pressure on Chris must have been immense.
Yeah.
How did they pinpoint what actually happened next?
Well, technology played a really crucial role again here. Remember that work truck he loaded?
Yeah, the one he backed into the garage.
That truck was equipped with GPS, standard for many company vehicles. Investigators obtained a warrant for that GPS data.
And it showed where he went that morning.
It showed exactly where he went after leaving the house. It tracked his movements, hour by hour, minute by minute almost, and it led them to a specific, fairly remote location, a work site owned by his employer at the time, Anadarko Petroleum.
Out in the middle of nowhere, basically.
Pretty much, an oil and gas site.
Ah.
And when investigators arrived there, based on that GPS data, well, that's when they made the most horrific discoveries.
This is the part that's just unbearable to think about. What did they find at the Anadarko site?
It was truly grim. They located Shanann's body first. She had been buried in a shallow grave dug into the dirt at the site.
Oh, God. And the girls, Bella and Celeste.
Their bodies were found inside two large crude oil storage tanks on the property. They had been stuffed inside them.
Crude oil tanks, those poor babies. I can't even fathom that. It's pure evil.
There's really no other word for it. The level of depravity is just staggering.
What did the autopsy reports eventually reveal? I know the details are disturbing, but they're important to understanding the full horror of this.
They are. The reports documented the violence and the utter callousness of how the bodies were treated. For Shanann, they noted that paper bags had been placed over both of her hands.
Paper bags. Why? Any idea?
It's hard to say for sure. Sometimes it's done in a panic to prevent evidence transfer, like skin under fingernails if someone fought back, or it could just be another sign of his disturbed state, trying to depersonalize the victim somehow. We don't know his exact reason.
Okay. And what else about Shanann?
The report also noted that her unborn son, whom they had planned to name Nico, had been partially expelled from her body in the grave and was covered in the dirt and sand. Just an absolutely tragic detail.
Unbelievable. And the girls, Bella and Celeste, in the tanks.
Yes. The reports detailed how Bella, who was 4 years old and weighed about 38 pounds, had scrapes on her arms and legs from being forced through the small 8-inch diameter opening at the top of the oil tank.
8 inches. He forced her through that tiny opening. Oh, my God.
Yes. She was found wearing a pink pajama top, one with hearts and butterflies on it. Celeste, Cece, who was 3, was found in an adjacent tank. She was wearing a pink top and a diaper.
And the oil.
Yeah.
You said they were in the oil tanks.
Yes. Both girls had crude oil found in their throats, their stomachs, and their lungs, according to the autopsy.
So, does that mean, were they still alive when you put them in the tanks? That's a question that haunts so many people.
The autopsies determined the cause of death for both girls was smothering, asphyxiation.
So he killed them before
Yeah.
putting them in the tanks.
That's what the evidence points to. The oil ingestion likely occurred post-mortem as their bodies were submerged in the crude oil. But there was another heartbreaking detail, especially regarding Bella.
What was that?
The autopsy showed that Bella had bitten through her own tongue and the inside of her cheeks.
She fought back. Even at 4 years old, she fought him.
It appears so, a sign of the struggle, the terror she must have experienced. It's just gut-wrenching to think about.
Absolutely gut-wrenching. And with the condition of the bodies, especially being in the oil, was it hard to determine the exact time they died?
Yes, that was a challenge. The decomposition process, which was accelerated by the heat of the Colorado summer and obviously the effects of the crude oil, made it very difficult for the medical examiners to pinpoint an exact time of death for any of them.
But they had a rough time frame based on when they were last seen alive and Chris's movements.
Exactly. Based on Shanann's return home, the neighbor's footage, the GPS data, and Chris's eventual confessions, investigators could establish a likely window during the early morning hours of August 13th.
Okay, so faced with the GPS evidence, the discovery of the bodies, the autopsy findings, Chris Watts couldn't keep up the facade anymore, right?
No. The evidence was overwhelming. He eventually abandoned his initial story, though he tried a couple of different versions first, trying to blame Shanann.
Right, I remember that. Horrible attempts to
Wow.
shift blame.
Truly despicable. But eventually, yes, he confessed. And to avoid facing the death penalty, which was a possibility in Colorado for multiple murders, he made a deal.
He pleaded guilty.
Yes. On November 6, 2018, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to multiple counts of first-degree murder, unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and tampering with deceased human bodies.
And the sentence.
Later that same month, November 2018, he was sentenced to 5 life sentences in prison, 3 consecutive and 2 concurrent, all without the possibility of parole, plus additional time for the other charges. He will never get out.
Justice. In terms of prison time, but the pain for Shanann's family, the Rizzo checks, it must be unimaginable. Did they get to speak at his sentencing?
They did. And their victim impact statements were incredibly powerful, filled with raw grief and anger. Shanann's father, Frank Ruszczak, spoke directly to Watts about the betrayal. He said Watts carried Shanann and his granddaughters out of the house like trash.
Oh, that's just heartbreaking.
It was. And Shanann's mother, Sandra Ruszczak, talked about how much they had loved and trusted Chris and how he shattered that trust in the most brutal way imaginable. You could just feel the depth of their loss and devastation.
It's a wound that will never truly heal for them. Beyond the criminal trial, there was also a civil lawsuit, wasn't there?
Yes, Shanann's parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Chris Watts.
What was the outcome of that?
He agreed to a judgment against him. He was ordered to pay $6 million to Shanann's family.
$6 million. I mean, obviously no amount of money can ever compensate for losing Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico.
Of course not. But the civil suit served as another formal acknowledgement, outside the criminal court, of the immense emotional distress, the pain, the suffering, and the damages he inflicted on them through his actions.
This case just resonated so much with the public, didn't it? There was so much media attention, and then the Netflix documentary came out.
Yes, American Murder, The Family Next Door. It got a huge amount of attention.
And it used a different approach.
Yeah.
Using mostly archival footage.
It did. It was constructed almost entirely from existing materials. Things like Shanann's own Facebook posts and videos, police body cam footage, interrogation room recordings, text messages between Shanann and Chris, home videos.
Wow. So it really puts you right there, seeing their lives unfold, but with this awful knowledge of what's coming.
Exactly. It aimed to tell the story through the lens of their own documented lives, which made it feel incredibly immediate and, frankly, quite disturbing to watch, knowing the ending.
Did the documentary delve into any of the public theories or the online discussion that surrounded the case? Because there was a lot of that.
It touched on it, yeah. The case generated intense online speculation and, sadly, a lot of commentary, not all of it positive or accurate.
Like what kind of things were people saying?
Well, the documentary acknowledged how some online communities focused heavily on Shanann's extensive social media presence, sometimes critically. There was also, unfortunately, online harassment directed at the Ruszczak family.
That's just awful. They're the victims here.
Absolutely. Shanann's family spoke out strongly against the negativity and the baseless theories being spread about them and about Shanann online. It's a really dark side of how these tragedies sometimes play out in the public eye.
Yeah, it really is. The documentary and just the general discussion also kept coming back to whether these murders were meticulously planned or more of an impulsive act, didn't it? What does the evidence really suggest there?
That's one of the central haunting questions, isn't it? And the truth might be somewhere in between. There's evidence that points towards some level of pre-planning.
Like what?
Well, for instance, investigators found that Chris had communicated with a coworker the day before the murders. He essentially confirmed that he would be going to that specific Anadarko site, the remote one, and crucially, that he'd be going there alone the next morning.
So, arranging to have the disposal site isolated. That sounds like planning.
It certainly suggests forethought about the disposal, yes. However, his initial confession described a huge argument with Shanann after she got home, claiming he snapped. While that narrative shifted, the idea of a volatile confrontation, perhaps triggering the final act, suggests some element of impulsivity might have been involved in the timing or the method of the murders themselves.
So, maybe a mix. Planning the escape route, the disposal, but the actual act triggered by something in the moment.
It's very possible. It's hard to know the precise sequence of his thoughts. But the coworker communication is pretty damning evidence of planning the aftermath, at least.
And then there was his mistress, Nichol Kessinger. Her role or potential role became a huge point of speculation, too.
Oh, absolutely. She came under intense scrutiny, partly because the affair itself provided a potential motive for Chris wanting to eradicate his existing family life.
What specific things about her behavior raised eyebrows?
Well, reports surfaced that she had deleted text messages between her and Chris from her phone shortly after the disappearances were reported.
Okay, deleting messages always looks suspicious.
It does. And then there were her internet search histories that investigators recovered. Apparently, she searched for things like wedding dresses online around that time. Also, she searched for the net worth of Amber Frey.
Amber Frey.
Yeah.
She was Scott Peterson's mistress, right?
Yeah.
Another infamous family annihilation case.
Exactly. Searching for her net worth certainly seemed odd in context. Plus, there were some reported inconsistencies in her statements to investigators compared to phone records and Chris's own accounts.
So lots of smoke there, potentially. Was she ever charged with anything?
No, she wasn't. Despite all the suspicion and online theories, law enforcement stated they didn't have evidence to charge Nichol Kessinger with any crime related to the murders. We don't definitively know how much she knew, if anything, about Chris's plans.
Okay. Going back to the neighbor's camera footage, you said it was crucial. Was there any debate about what it showed?
Well, the footage clearly showed Chris backing his truck in and his general movements, which, as we said, contradicted his story. That wasn't really in dispute.
Right.
But some of the online discussion focused on the clarity of the video. Like, could you definitively see bodies being looted? Could you see the girls getting into the truck alive? Or were they already deceased? The footage wasn't crystal clear on those specific details due to distance and lighting.
So it proved he lied about his timeline and actions, but maybe not the exact state of the victims at that moment?
Pretty much. For investigators, though, it was enough. It proved deception. It showed suspicious activity at the key time. It was a powerful piece of the puzzle, even without showing every gruesome detail.
We touched on the autopsy reports not giving an exact time of death,
Right.
likely due to the decomposition and the oil. Did that lack of precision fuel more online theories?
Oh, definitely. When there are gaps in official information, speculation tends to rush in, especially online. People came up with various theories based on the lack of a specific time.
But the medical examiners basically said it wasn't possible to be more precise.
Correct. The lead pathologist involved was quite clear that determining an exact time of death in those circumstances with significant decomposition and the environmental factors, the heat, the oil, just wasn't scientifically feasible. They could establish the cause of death and the general time frame, but pinpointing it to the hour wasn't possible.
Okay, that makes sense. One detail that emerged later, which is just another layer of horror, is about the girls' remains and cremation.
Yes, that was particularly distressing. It came out that because Bella and Celeste's bodies had absorbed so much crude oil while in the tanks,
They couldn't be cremated.
they couldn't be cremated safely. The amount of volatile oil saturation posed a significant fire risk in the crematorium.
Oh my goodness. So even in death, the way he disposed of them created more trauma and difficulty for the family.
Exactly. It's just another stark illustration of the utter lack of humanity, the complete disregard he showed for his own children, adding another layer of pain onto an already unbearable tragedy for the Rusick family.
This entire case, it's just staggering. From that initial image of the tearful husband on TV to the discovery of what he'd actually done, it's a nightmare journey into betrayal and just unbelievable violence.
It really is. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and their unborn son, Nico. Their lives were stolen in such a brutal and calculated way.
And the details that came out, especially from the autopsies, Bella fighting back, the sheer coldness of using those oil tanks, it's profoundly disturbing.
It is. It serves as such a chilling reminder, doesn't it? That sometimes the most unimaginable darkness can be hiding behind a perfectly ordinary, even friendly facade.
It absolutely makes you wonder, what pushes someone to that point, to commit such an utterly unthinkable act against the very people they're supposed to love and protect the most?
That's the question that lingers, isn't it?
Yeah. What does a case like the Watts family tragedy really tell us about the potential for evil that can exist, hidden just beneath the surface of everyday life? It's a deeply unsettling thought to leave you with.
It really is. It forces you to confront the idea that appearances can be incredibly deceptive, and the motivations behind such extreme violence are often terrifyingly complex and deeply, deeply disturbing.
If this exploration into the shadows of the Watts case has resonated with you, if it's made you think, We'd appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
And please follow us over on Spotify as well. We'll continue to explore these complex and often harrowing stories, trying to understand the darkness that exists in the world.